morning is going to come from the book of 2 Corinthians, chapter 12, verses 5 through 10. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself, except about my weaknesses. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say, or because of these surpassingly great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan, to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." The sermon title today is World's Strongest. How many of you have ever seen the competitions on TV titled The World's Strongest Man? We've all seen or heard tales of it. Absolutely phenomenal. I remember there was a guy, I believe he was from Sweden, his name was Magnus Magnusson. Beast of a man, probably 6'4", 280 pounds, could lift boulders the size of this pulpit. But seeing that competition reminded me of a story. There were 2 farm boys out in Kansas. One of them, probably about the size of Magnus Magnusson, 6'4", 280, could take straw bales, one on each shoulder. And there was another farm boy, exactly the opposite. Scrawny, skinny. You might even label him as being weak. Well, it was their senior year, and the annual fall dance was fast approaching for their farm community. And this is where the story starts to get interesting. Both the strong farm boy and the weak farm boy liked the same girl. And of course, each of them wanted to ask the girl to the fall dance. Now, it wasn't really a problem because, well, the girl liked both of them as well. But between the boys, they decided they would go ahead and create some sort of contest to see who would get to ask the girl to the dance. The farm boy, knowing his size and strength would be a benefit, said to the skinny one, "Hey, how about if we have a contest of strength to determine which one of us gets to ask the girl to the dance?" The scrawny one said, "All right, I have absolutely no problem with that under one condition. I get to choose the strength competition that we do." Farm boy said, "Go for it. Pick whatever you want." Pretty confident, right? Said, "This Saturday we'll meet at my farm, conduct the contest, and by Saturday night I'll be asking the girl to the dance." Saturday comes. The scrawny young man shows up in his pickup truck with a wheelbarrow in the back of his bed. Pulls the wheelbarrow out, sets it at the end of the driveway, and he goes, "Okay, here's the contest. I will bet you that I can wheel something from the end of the driveway up to the barn that you will not be able to wheel back." "Yeah, okay, whatever. You're on." The skinny boy grabbed the handles of the wheelbarrow, looked at the big boy, and said, "Get in." I like the delay I always get with that joke. It just kind of goes,
Wait.
"Oh, yeah, there it is." But you know what? The strong farm boy typifies much of how the world thinks about life. The biggest, the strongest, the fastest. That's the way to win. That's all you need in this life. Why? Because it's the survival of the fittest. The person with the most might, the most power, the most money, they always win. It's all about self-preservation rather than self-sacrifice. But honestly, is that what we read within the Scriptures? When you open the pages of the Bible, everything changes. We find there are times where the little guy is beating the big guy. You have Moses walking into the court of one of the most powerful rulers in that area with nothing more than a stick, saying, "Let my people go." You have Gideon, who honestly was an inexperienced leader, facing off against thousands and thousands of ruthless warriors with an army of only 300 men. Probably the most famous, the little shepherd boy, David, going up against the giant Goliath. Again and again in Scripture, the little guy beats the big guy. Might, power, position mean nothing. The little guy still wins. But why? Why is the little guy always winning? What is going on? Because those little guys serve God. And God is bigger than absolutely everyone else. The bad guys flag around against God's people and brag that they'll be able to defeat them. They'll be able to destroy them. And then God smiles and says, "You better go get yourself a couple more armies." Well, no, that won't help you either. It's not going to be a fair fight. In 2 Chronicles, we're told the story of the king of Assyria who comes sweeping down out of the north, laying waste to every nation, tribe, town, and city in his path. He came to Jerusalem and surrounds it with his army. He yells at the city wall, "Do not let Hezekiah deceive you and mislead you like this." He's talking about the prophet Hezekiah. "Do not believe him, for no God of any nation or kingdom has been able to deliver his people from my hand or the hand of my fathers. How much less will your God deliver you from my hand? Who of all the gods of these nations that my fathers destroyed has been able to save his people from me? How then can your God deliver you from my hand?" Now, a couple commentaries that I found estimated that the king of Assyria's army was somewhere around 185,000 men. 185,000. Okay? After he was done bragging and boasting, he went back, and of course they were encamped for the night. And God had a plan. God sent a single angel to confront the Assyrian army. And guess what the people of Jerusalem saw when the sun rose the next morning? They saw 185,000 dead warriors around the city. A single angel versus 185,000. The king's name was Sennacherib. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. But he obviously fled, went back to his own city, and decided to worship to his God in his own temple because he was so distraught over what happened. And while he was in there, his own sons came in with a sword and killed him because they were ashamed. This is what the Bible's message is about this. The little guy who trusts in God can whip any guy on the block because God is bigger than anyone else. In Romans chapter 8, verse 31, it says at the end, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" When Paul writes that God told him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." And then Paul concludes, "When I am weak, then I am strong." You know what Paul is talking about. So that truth that Paul wrote about, that I am weak, forces me to do something I wouldn't do if I were strong. My strength in life only comes through walking close with Jesus. I told the kids this morning during the kids' time that my favorite verse is Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Through him I gain his strength, his power, his ability to deal with the difficulties of life. And I gain that strength only because I walk close to him. Many people think they can get by doing things themselves. I'm strong enough, I'm smart enough, I can handle this on my own. It typically doesn't work out that way, because God's in the background saying, hey, let me help you out with that. Come on. All you got to do is ask. In Psalm 29:11, David declares, the Lord gives strength to his people. That's a promise directly from God. He is actually asking you and offering to be your strength. You see, until we realize God is strong and we're weak, we tend to live Christianity backwards. You see, we tend to live as if God needs us. We tend to believe that God needs our time, our talent, in order to survive. We tend to believe that God depends on us far more than we depend on him because, hey, God couldn't live without us, right? How backwards is that? But honestly, if God's not impressed by the biggest, baddest guys on earth, do you really think that he is going to be impressed with our puniness? I don't think so. In the scripture reading this morning, we find that Paul was certainly tempted with a feeling. He talks about boasting and bragging. So let me back up just a few verses. Paul says in his letter to the church at Corinth, about 14 years ago, there was a guy who was taken to paradise and saw things that he is not allowed to talk about. Paul was actually talking about himself in those words of Scripture. And when we think about Paul, we think about him being a legend, a super apostle. I mean, come on. Whenever he spoke, large crowds of people gathered and were convinced of the truth of Jesus. He started numerous churches throughout Greece and Rome. He knew the Bible backwards and forwards. Come on, he practically wrote half of the New Testament. But what was Paul saying here in this letter? He had every reason to say, I'm number one. But he didn't. He realized that through his weakness came his strength. He talks about the thorn in his flesh. Seems kind of mean that God sent a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan, to torment him. Why would God do that? Now, it's been thought that there could have been any number of things that were the thorn in his flesh. Some commentators say it was a degenerative eye disease. Other commentators say it was a form of malaria. We really don't know what the thorn in the flesh was. But you know what? He asked God 3 times. 3 times. This is Paul we're talking about. And God said, no. God said, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. And that's the universal truth of Christ's kingdom. We look no further than the next chapter in 2 Corinthians 13, verse 4. We're told that Jesus was crucified in weakness, yet he lives by God's power.